We're in chapter 4 of 2 Samuel. I'm sorry, was I interrupting? Chapter... Huh? Do you really want me to answer that honestly? You should have stayed back there and presented a low acquisition target in the turret. Chapter 4. What has happened up to this point? Can anybody remember what has happened last time we were in Samuel chapter 3? Joab murdered Abner. Joab had a little help murdering Abner, right? And what does David do? Does he like going, yes?
He laments his death.
He laments his death for a couple reasons. What was Abner under when Joab murdered Abner? He was under safe passage. Because remember, they're at war with each other, and Abner comes to seek a peace. Why does Abner come to seek a peace? Remember that, and there was a dust up between Abner and the puppet, Ishbosheth. And what did Ishbosheth catch Abner doing? Sleeping with the king's concubine. And so Abner said, okay, I'll fix your little red wagon. I'm going to take my toys and army and go home. I'll seek a peace with David. And you kind of see, as we're looking through this, all this interesting interplay, how people are jockeying for position. Because at the beginning of this part of 2 Samuel, we saw that at the very beginning, you see where David's side is gaining ground, and Saul's side, even though they have 11 full tribes, is continually losing ground. And it's not because the men of Judah were better soldiers. It's because David is God's anointed, and God is helping David and aiding Judah and subjugating the 11 tribes. So Abner's dead. But Abner's promised that Israel will join Judah and become one nation. Got a problem now, right? The man making all that brokering is dead. Right? It's kind of like when you make a side deal with the car guy at the dealer, and then he all of a sudden quits and your side deal goes away with him. No, you've never had that happen? Anyhow, let's pick up in 4 and see what happens here. When Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had died at Hebron, his courage failed, and all of Israel was dismayed. Now Saul had 2 men who were captains of raiding bands, and one's name was Baanah, and the other's name was Rechab, sons of Rimmon, a man of Benjamin from Beroth. Beroth is also counted as part of Benjamin, and the Beerothites fled to get them and have been sojourners there to this day. Nice little parenthetical footnote. Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was crippled in his feet. And he was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. And his nurse took him up and fled, and she fled. In her haste she fell, and he became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. Now the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, Rechab, and Baanah, set out in the heat of the day, and they came to the house of Ishbosheth as he was taking his noonday rest. And they came into the midst of the house as if to get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Baanah and his brother escaped, but when they came into the house, as he laid on his bed in the bedroom, they struck him and put him to death and beheaded him and took his head, and they went the way of Arabah all night and brought his head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron. And they said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. The Lord has avenged my Lord as king this day on Saul and his offspring." And David answered to Rechab and Baanah, his brother, and the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of adversity, When one told me that Saul was dead and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him at Ziklag. Which was the reward I gave to him for his news? How much more when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed, shall I not require his blood at your hand and destroy you from the earth? And David commanded his young men, and they killed them and cut off their hands and feet and hanged them beside the pool at Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner at Hebron. Talk about some treachery. Talk about some treachery. And then you've got like these two little parenthetical footnotes, and they're interesting because, we'll push forward here in a minute. When Ishbosheth hears that Abner is dead, he's worried. Why? Huh? He just lost his general. Remember, Abner's the guy in the first engagement that keeps Israel from routing. Judah has them on the run. Judah is pursuing them. This is where Joab's brother gets killed. And Abner finally is able to rally enough forces as they have run away far enough, and Judah's forces have outstretched where they were. He finally spins around and says, hey, you want to keep fighting? And they slip away and they save the battle from being an absolute rout. That's Abner. He was able to do that. Abner's also done what? If you look at chapter 3, as Saul's family is losing power, Abner himself, though, is gaining what? He's gaining power. The death of Abner is a key loss. That would be the equivalent of, in the midst of a major battle, having the command and control function of what's engaged being killed. That's why during the Revolutionary War, a lot of the American irregular forces would target officers and commanders because they were the ones actually directing the army. Nowadays, maybe not so much. And so, when you lose a key general, you lose the ability to conduct military operations. You also lose the ability to rally forces. Was Abner a key player in the house of Benjamin? Very much so. Was Abner a key player amongst the other 10 tribes? It's Abner that has gone out and got the other 10 tribes to say, yeah, if you can assign peace with David, we'll support it. Now he's dead. This is a terrifying blow. Your position was already weak to begin with. You were never really a power broker anyway, but now if David chooses to attack, can you mount an adequate defense? No. So he is dismayed, and all of Israel with him. Have you ever been in a nation with a weak leader?
Loaded question.
Do you feel kind of vulnerable when you have a weak leader? We'll just pick that up here in a minute. So Israel's dismayed. Now notice what it does. All of a sudden you have this shift here. Now Saul had sons. Saul's sons had 2 men that were captains of raiding bands, much like what Joab, Bana, and Rechab. They're also men of the tribe of Benjamin. And notice, they are not necessarily the greatest men in the world. But it introduces them, and then all of a sudden you get this weird footnote. Check this out. Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was crippled. He was 5 years old when the news of Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and the nurse took him and fled, and she fled in her haste and fell and he became lame. In the middle of the description of the death of Ishbosheth, you have this verse inserted, which is not picked up really again until chapter 9. Now, a couple problems is some manuscripts don't have this verse, some manuscripts do, and it's an argument about manuscripts should it be in there and should it not be in there. I don't have a problem with it being in there. I don't think it takes away or adds anything away from the text. But what happens is you have this interesting piece of information, and if you've noticed, every time the Bible gives you a very interesting piece of information, it usually does it in the weirdest of places, right? Here is Ishbosheth, and he's got two captains, and we've just read what's going to happen. But in between that, hey, there's a crippled kid named Mephibosheth. Okay. It's kind of like having a conversation with a nonlinear thinker. Have you ever had one of those? Everything just kind of comes at you as it comes into their head. And you're like, I'm sorry, you're just really going to have to put this in a line for me. No, none of you? Ever? Ever? Conversations with your... No, I'm kidding. I live in the address. My zip code is TROUBLE. But you have this insert here. Now again, we know who Mephibosheth is. We will find out more about who Mephibosheth is. But one of the reasons why it's in here is who would be the only heir after Ishbosheth dies? Mephibosheth. But can he really be king? He's a cripple. When I was in Iraq, the first time, my second tour, we were down in Al Qut, which is right over near the Iranian border. And when we were there, the Special Forces team captured the second most terrifying man in that region, the most wanted man. And when they put him on the bird and he flew off, they went nuts and they lit us up for about 45 minutes. And since they can't shoot, it was safer to stand still than it was to move. Because they just spray and pray. But anyhow, second most feared man in the Wasid province. He was a crippled, one-eyed midget. I have yet to figure out how he was so terrifying. Now, he had a 6'8" bodyguard, and maybe that had a lot to do with it. But when you think of men that are terrifying, a crippled, one-eyed midget does not come to mind. They say when they put him on the helicopter, they picked him up to put him on the Chinook, and his feet dangled like that, and everyone there at the airfield laughed until they started lighting us up. But, you know, you don't really think about men like that being great warriors. Why? Well, he's not going to run very far, and he has no depth perception because he only has what? One eye. He'll sling a sword just as good as Peter will. Wait for it. Peter got Van Gogh, too. Google search it, you'll figure it out. So Ishbosheth is not going to be king. It's kind of what the text is alluding to. The next guy in line for Israel is a cripple.
What can a cripple be the king?
I don't see any implications that says he can't. But with the people following him, I mean, think about it. How is a cripple going to lead an army into battle? Well, typically, but if you also see when David goes to sin, what does the text say? In the day when the kings go out to battle. It was customary for kings to accompany the men and then the forces out to battle. And you can't have a cripple. I guess you could strap him to the saddle, but then he's a target and vulnerable to all attacks, but from spear and bow and archer. So, you know, he might be a brilliant thinker, but he may be a gross liability. But you also know, coming in chapter 9, that David is going to he's going to be the man.
Plus, God said that Saul's line was not going to be anymore.
That's right. Absolutely. And so you got this thing. And so then it jumps back in verse 5. Now the sons of Ramah, and it kind of repeats itself here. Again, 4 and 5 are in some manuscripts, 4 and 5 are not in other manuscripts. And that's not a big issue for me because not every verse is in every manuscript, and that's okay because we don't have total, complete manuscripts of every manuscript, but we have sufficient to be able to build text, and it doesn't trouble me at all. It shouldn't trouble you at all because the information is there. Now, Rakam, and who's the other guy? Bana. They go in the heat of the day while Ishbosheth is resting under the guise of getting food. Now, these people are awfully lazy sleeping in the middle of the day. It's hot. When we lived in Italy, there was a time called riposo, usually after about 13:30 to about 15:30, and nothing happened. Yeah, nothing happened. If you wanted to do business in Italy, you either did it between 08 and 1200, or you picked up again at 13:30 or 15:30, and you rocked to 2200 at night. That's just how it worked. Nothing moved. They shut down. You'd go visit an Italian town, you eat lunch, and you go to see the sights. All the shutters are closed. All the streets are rolled up. And you can always tell who the Americans are because we're all the ones walking around the street going, "Where's everybody? It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I want a cheeseburger." Sorry, sir. There is nothing open until 7 o'clock tonight. Go to the bar. And in Italy, when they tell you to go to the bar, it's not a place where you go to get hammered. It's actually like a coffee bar, sandwich bar, and they happen to sell alcohol. But it's not like, go to the bar. No, it's not like, don't think biker, think, coffee and sandwiches. All right. But riposo, and they followed that tenaciously because it's hot. Here, Ishbosheth is trying to rest in the heat of the day. He's in the inner of the house, which is the coolest part, and these guys slip in under the guise that they are going to get some food, and apparently in this time and era, it's all the rage to stab people in the stomach. Abner stabs Joab's brother in the stomach. Joab stabs Abner in the stomach. Everybody stabs Ishbosheth in the stomach. The stomach seems a very popular place, I guess. But notice what goes on here. They stab him, they kill him, and then what do? They cut off his head. That's a lot of that. If you've ever watched like Snapped, huh? If he wasn't dead or not, that's like killing him and then some. If you've ever watched Snap, people would, or like a crime show or anything like that, they go, this murder seems to have a personal intent in nature. Whoa! Now think about this though. One family, since they came on the scene, has set an example of treachery. What is the example that Saul has led in the line of Benjamin and in the house of Benjamin since he's become king? Has he lived and demonstrated a godly life? No, he's just been a scoundrel. He's almost, I love you, David. Go away, I hate you. I love you, David. Go away. It's almost like he's a borderline. I mean, seriously. David, I love you so much. Go away, I'll kill you. One of those bad episodes on TV where people end up thinking they're loved and then they, she married the perfect man. Lifetime movies, right? She married the perfect man and then one night she killed him. You ever watch those Lifetime movies, Delight? Why not?
Because I don't want to watch beheading and sticking in the stomach and...
Well, that's in the Bible. Do you read the Bible?
Well, yeah.
Well, it's in the Bible. I mean, come on. There's more murder and treachery going on in the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel than in The Godfather. And that says something. I mean, Vito Corleone would at least give you a warning. I'll make him an offer I can't refuse. I come here to talk to you. This is what you do. I mean, he at least does that. These dudes slip in and like stab a guy in the gut. I mean, come on. Yeah. Instead of waking up with these horses' head in the bed and I mean, Ishbosheth is like Fredo being in charge of the Corleone family.
This is scary.
It is scary. It's in the Bible too. They ought to put a rating on this chapter, right?
Maybe we better go to another chapter.
Is it scaring you? We'll leave the light on tonight, okay? They stab him, they behead him. Now, they know what they're doing is wrong. Where do they get the example from? Well, first of all, you get it from Saul. At every time Saul has gone out to chase David, Saul knows that he is working against the will of God, and he goes out and says, David, I love you, but I'm going to kill you. Notice David's response every time Saul goes to kill him. David has had Saul dead to right, and has been right and would have been right in killing Saul in our economy. But at every turn, David looks at this and says, I will not put my hand on God's anointed man. It got to the point where his own men said, look, we know you can't do it, but we go to bang, bang, bang. He's done. And David says, no. You have this weird compare and contrast between Saul and his family. And then Abner, when he gets offended for doing something he should not have done, which is sleep with the king's concubine, that's a huge no-no. Abner gets offended and says what? Well, you're right. I shouldn't have done that, and I won't do it again. No. Hey, guess what? I made you king, and now I'm going to take your kingdom away. I'm going to go talk to David. Peace out. One side is just a treacherous side. One side is just a side of simply just backbiting and interplay and political interplay. I mean, it's almost like a Republican primary. They go in, they kill him. They cut off his head. Now we know why. They ride all night. And they go, David, here's the head of Ishbosheth. Now Abner sells David out, and we surmise with the idea of getting a good pick of a job in David's administration. About this time of year, on both sides of the political spectrum, you'll see enemies begin to jockey for positions in cabinet positions, right? You know, and you kind of see people that used to go, oh, that man, he's horrible. Oh, no, he's Satan's spawn. Oh, man. Back and forth, and all of a sudden, no, I love them to death. They're great. I would be proud to be their Secretary of State. But I'm not saying I'd do it, but I'd be proud to be the Secretary of State on that person. And they start jockeying for positions. Abner began this cycle. Oh, okay, well, I'll go and I'll make a peace, and then the speculation is that Abner is going to parlay that into being in a position almost like Joab. These two knuckleheads thought, well, hey, we'll kill Ishbosheth, because what's the problem with David uniting the 11 tribes? There's a king over the 11 tribes. And he's in direct lineage of Saul. Now, granted, the Lord said that lineage is going to break, and David would be king, but the 11 tribes have already backed this guy. So he has to be done away with. He has to disappear. So these guys figure out they'll just help the plan along. And they kill him, and they go to David, and they go, hey, look, here's the head. We would like the job of general, maybe not, like a general, maybe like a general, not really high on the pole. We're not looking for anything fancy, maybe with a cool robe and a nice sword, but, maybe like that. What does David say? Now, clearly, let me ask this question. Should they have known the response David was going to give them? They should have known the response. David has been poignantly clear about this. But pride and ego sometimes blind you to the facts of reality. The Lord has avenged my Lord. Look, David, the Lord has avenged you, this king, Saul's offspring. I already had the kingdom wrapped up. The 10, 11 tribes were going to pledge their allegiance to me, and Ishbosheth was going to be out. But David answered Rechab and Baanah and his brother and the sons of Rimmonite the Beerothite, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life out of every adversity. Who does David give credit for as delivering him? Even when Saul was in front of the cave relieving himself, and David goes up and cuts the hem of his garment, and they were terrified that if they were found, they would be trapped, who does David give the credit to? The Lord. When David kills the giant, Goliath, who does David give credit to? When David goes and he destroys these people that are in the lands near the Philistines and he wipes them all out, who does he give the credit to? Gives it to the Lord. At every turn, he seeks the Lord's face. Every time Saul pursues him, he gives the credit for his escape to the Lord. And he looks at these guys and says, as the Lord who has delivered me from all adversity, to include you. When one told me, behold, Saul is dead. Now, that's not what he actually said, now was it? The young man did not say Saul is dead. We know from the last chapter of book 1 that Saul fell on his sword and died. In chapter 1, the young man said, I saw Saul, he was wounded, and I killed him, and I took these things. And we talked about that. And David says, look, this man told me Saul was dead. He was actually an active participant in killing Saul, according to him. When he brought me this good news, I seized him and killed him. When a man who falsely claimed that he had killed the king came to me, I killed him. Why? That, and do you put your hand upon God's anointed man? Not even if you don't like him. And that's really kind of the issue here. And check out what he does. Which as the reward I gave him for his news. How much more will I do the wicked man have killed a righteous man in his own bed? A good man in his own bed. Well, as a man, it's kind of a cowardly act to stab a man while he's sleeping, right? What do you think, Delight? You think so? I think it is. I think it lacks that honor and integrity. You know, Mortal Kombat is one thing, and you kill the man in Mortal Kombat. Okay, great. But to wait for him to be asleep and then stab him in the stomach, that's pretty cowardly. Then, and then to cut his head off. Ooh, ooh. That's in the heat of the day. Ugh. It's just bad. You're going to sleep with the lights on tonight, aren't you?
I got a question, though. So
Yeah.
do you think this was premeditated or
Oh, I think, I think there was some planning going on. When you see Abner die, and Ishbosheth is your only opportunity, it's like rats trying to get off the ship. And they saw an opportunity as raiding captains where they could go to David and go, hey, look what we've done for you, brother. We've delivered the goods. We followed up on what Abner promised. I think that's a very good possibility to look at. So there's an element of premeditation because you don't sneak into a place contrived with one excuse, then, commit the act that you're doing and then go, it just came to me like in the moment. As I walked into the AC, got to me, and I killed him. I think there's an element of premeditation here. And I think a lot of it has to do with a jockeying for position in David's monarchy.
Well, I know, because you were talking about how common sense would tell him don't do that, but then here's this dude, he's just asleep, so maybe now's the time.
And you look at that, you go, exactly at what point did they realize that they were going to die? Probably about the time they were going to die. There's a show, or used to be one on TV, called Stupid Criminals. Criminals are dumb because criminals are dumb. I mean, that sounds cliche-ish, but most of the people I dealt with that were criminals when I worked in the inner city Dallas, I met with had dealings with gangs and things like that. Not that I dealt with gangs, but as a minister, you're in a gang area. They all thought they were very smart people, but I've not run into very few of them that were like overly brilliant. They were just able to avoid being caught for a while. And then eventually their time runs out, they're caught, and then they go to jail. It's really about it. I mean, I don't think these guys were overly that bright. I thought that they thought of a plan. This would be a great idea. We're going to do it. We'll show up. We'll give David his thing, and then pow. And really what I see. To answer your question?
No good. I told you I think in cartoons, so I'm picturing like the two stupid henchmen from Scooby-Doo or something sneaking in.
I think you could probably play that along. I mean, it's not like they're void of any brains, but had they known anything of the man they were going to go see, they would have known that what they've done would have met with an instant death sentence. I think they did. But think about it. A lot of times when we deal with individuals, we don't necessarily deal with the individual as who they are, but who we perceive them to be, or who we think that they're going to respond to us as being. And that's usually when we have issues where we have conflicts of interest or conflicts in a relationship, or we have assumed something wrong about individuals because we have assumed something about how they would respond to something, and then when they respond totally different, we go, didn't. Fastest hands in the West.
Time after time in the Bible, you see that people did things to clear the playing field.
That's right.
And they thought they were clearing the playing field. But they weren't the only ones who killed somebody who was sleeping.
That's right.
Was it Jael that nailed the guy down in his
Put the spike right through his temple and yeah.
And so this was not something they didn't know about.
Yeah.
There have been other examples of this.
Absolutely. Yeah, bro.
Are these the same two guys that told David to take a walk when they found Saul's camp sleeping?
No.
But it seems to run rampant amongst David's people. Hey, why don't you go take a walk while we do your dirty work?
Well, these are Benjaminites though. These are not men of Judah. So this is Saul's house. These are Saul's men. And so what you have here, and one of the things that I see is, you see here in this activity the culmination of the example of Saul amongst his own people. Saul is not a leader to be trusted. Abner was not a leader to be trusted. As a matter of fact, that was Joab's claim against him. He's come to spy us out. These men proved the fact that the Benjamites couldn't be trusted, or at least some of them, because if you teach someone to lie for you, eventually you have taught them to lie to you. If you teach someone to kill for you, you have actually begun to teach them to plot your downfall. Saul begins down this road of treachery and down this road in which there's all this stuff going on and all this interplay. And I would be surprised if Saul, if he was still alive, woke up and go, "What? Oh my gosh!" I don't see how they could not be in this path just because the example they had as a king. And now they've got a king example of a weak king. I might be wrong, and I like the discussion. If y'all want to keep drilling in this vein, we can go for a little bit further. But I guess they thought that somehow they were going to convince David because they have the king's head. And David goes into the whole issue about, I killed a man that claimed that he killed Saul. What more am I going to do? And you go, well, what more can you do than kill a guy? Well, David comes up with a very interesting answer, doesn't he? He kills them, and then he what? Cuts off their hands and feet, which I find very interesting. And oddly enough, when I read several commentaries, you know what they said? They cut off his hands and feet. They go, oh, okay, I thought there might have been something significant about that. But apparently once you're dead, and so it really doesn't matter.
But it wasn't just that he cut him off. He hung him up on the fence like you would a coyote.
That's right. He nailed it. That's right. And so the treachery that they had committed is revealed to those involved. Now think about this. Why would David do that to these men?
Show other people that what you get for.
Okay, the price of treachery. Okay, it was in God's plan. David, when Joab kills Abner, does what? There you go. When Joab kills Abner, David's concern is not necessarily that Abner is killed, but who can be ascribed as leading the event that gets Joab killed. Gets pinned on David. And David immediately begins to take steps to where that all of Israel recognizes that it was these two men that kill Abner for a blood debt, and David's hands are clean. If the king of Israel is killed, and all David does is kill the two men that killed the king, What does that look like? Conspiracy theorists unite. David had Ishbosheth killed and then killed the only two people that could implicate David. Right? You people watch any conspiracy shows? I mean, this is like straight out. Do you know? You got to watch some conspiracy shows. The conspirator mind is very interesting. No? Like the man on the grassy knoll?
Where do you find all these things for?
The man on the grassy knoll. How many know what I'm talking about? He was the guy that shot Kennedy. There's not really. Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy. There was a guy behind the fence. There was a guy on the grassy knoll. Oh man, he was killed by the mob and the CIA. Don't you know these things? And you know, when they finally open the vault, they're going to find a note by LBJ that says, "I shot JFK," signed LBJ. That's what they're going to find. No, they're not going to find anything. Anything that was incriminating was shredded a long time ago and burned. But if you're yes, but they still tilt on. I mean, think about it. If you're David and the king is killed, that's your rival, by these worthless men, and you don't take any real action other than killing them, you set yourself up for the implication that you had something involved in it. But if you cut off their hands and feet, nail them to the fence, and says this is the penalty for when a man lays his hand against God's anointed, just like when this man killed Saul, you set the precedent. Two things. First of all, don't mess with David. He'll hang you on the wall after he cut off your hands and feet. Two, he had nothing to do with the death of the king. These were wicked men that sought the favor of David. And what they actually got was a disgraceful death. Notice what he does for Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth is his rival. Ishbosheth is a weak king. Abner was the guy behind the power, and he takes Ishbosheth's head and he buries it where? With Abner. Many people believe that this is a sign of respect and a sign of love and a sign of concern.
It's also closing the loop.
It also completes the loop and it's finished business. You now have the door open for David to become king over all of Israel. And it's going to come at a great time, because when a king dies and you have powerful enemies on all sides, do they see an opportunity to strike to expand their territory? Yes. Yes. Look at all that's involved since Saul becomes king. There's no peace in his household. He is filled with a wicked spirit. He quarrels with his own son. He's almost tried to kill his own son. He quarrels with his best commander. He tries to kill his best commander. Poor Saul could not throw a spear to save his life. He pursues David. He killed 1,000 men. David did times 10. At every turn with what Saul has left behind, you see nothing but treachery, deceit, and wickedness. At every turn with David, up to this point, you see where God is rewarding him for doing what is godly. You really have two very clear examples of how to live a life. And what happens when you decide to live a life based upon treachery, deceit, lies, and obtaining things by your own means? Listen, man, that's the life of Saul. How well did that go for him? Not so well. He died.
His family died.
His family died. His sons died. The Philistines nailed them to the wall of a stronghold. You have David. At every opportunity, could have killed Saul and could have killed his family, could have wiped this mess out. Remember, when we talk about this on Sunday morning, God's plan versus our plans. The way we would have looked at this is, while Saul was taking a Class 2 download in the cave, you walk up behind him, you stick him in the back. You don't want to stick him in the gut at that time, but anyhow, you stick him in the back, pow, David's king. But we've talked about that interplay. While Saul's sleeping, David let his man spear his head to the ground. David's king. When Abner comes, hey, bring Ishbosheth back. When they show up in the camp, you kill them both. David's king. See, we look at the situation, go, we could bring about the monarchy so much faster. And you see men who try to. And you see God's plan. And it weaves back and forth, and it takes turns, and David goes into exile and stays in exile. David goes into other places, and people die, and you have this. But it works out. David eventually becomes king. And then David becomes the quintessential king of Israel. He's the only one, he's the king that every other king is compared to until Christ returns, or Christ shows up. That's right. You have a brilliant interplay between two houses. I think it is just strikingly different. Any other questions before we close out? All right. The text does not say that he did, but I don't know if he did or not.
What about the other one?
Mephibosheth?
Crippled one.
Well, we don't know, find out about him till chapter 9, but if I tell you now, you won't show up.
That's one of the great stories.
That's one of the great stories, because what David should do as king and what David does do as king are two radically different concepts, which continues on that interplay. So yeah, let's close out in a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day and for this opportunity to study your word, and Heavenly Father, for the interplay between David and Saul's house. Just the remarkability of how treacherous one side can be, and how even on one side you still have some treachery, but yet the man at the top is still a man that seeks after you and worships you and follows after you. So Father, I ask you to be with all of us here today as we finish out our Sunday here with us in a common worship, and as we get ready to go and participate in the celebration of graduations. For the mile markers it is for those who have graduated and have now moving on to the next step. Heavenly Father, we ask that you bless the food and fellowship this evening to the nourishment of our body, and we ask for your watch care over us until you bring us safely back. We ask these things in your name we pray. Amen.